زي Khadouji +5.
It's live.
بسم الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Let me just double check.
زي Khadouji +5.
Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وأنعم على حبيبنا محمد. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وأنعم على حبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to my two beloved shuyukh and to everyone who's with us both on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. I begin by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, to send an abundance of peace and prayers upon our beloved messenger. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send down his peace and his tranquility and his blessings and his guidance and his protection upon me, Sheikh Yasir and Sheikh Usama and everyone listening in this extended circle that we have of dhikr and ilm, inshallah. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify our intentions and that he makes us a means of worshiping him for all of us involved, and that he allows us to count for us on the day that we meet him on our scales of good deeds. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, put an immense amount of barakah in the questions that are going to be asked and in the answers that are going to be given, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, purifies us all through this process. Assalamu alaikum, shuyukhna.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I can definitely see that we're live on Facebook. I'm just going to do a very quick check on YouTube just to make sure that everything's working. Bismillah. And it is live on both. Okay, good. And I'll do my best to monitor the comments on both Facebook and YouTube. So if you ask a question on either one, I'll do my best to get to it, inshallah. As always, if we're not able to get to all the questions, please forgive us. We already have a bunch of questions that have come in over the course of the week. As you guys are used to by now, when it comes to an AMA, you never know how long each question might go or what follow-up questions may come up afterwards. So please forgive us if we're not able to get to your question on time or in a timely fashion, or even get to it today at all. So we'll begin, inshallah, with our first question today. Bismillah. I don't know if this is an easy one, but it's the one that's on the phone, so I'm going to go with it. The question comes, does a single woman have to have a mahram everywhere that she goes? And she has some examples here, like school, work, conferences, so everyday travel or some more extended travel. And are they allowed to live alone? And then she asks, what about in the case of someone who's struggling with an issue of abuse in the home? So I think there's just a general question about what the rules of having a mahram are in today's world. I started us off hot and heavy, so either one of our two mashayikh can jump in and take this one, inshallah.
Sheikh Usama
تفضل يا مولانا.
is drinking a hot cup of tea and perfect for your hot and heavy question. So Bismillah.
It's actually coffee, Sheikh.
طيب, even better. انت مصحصح يعني جاهز.
تفضل يا مولانا.
تفضل سيدي, please.
طيب بسم الله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. There are a number of different angles to this question that should be addressed. It's very important to note, as just as a note or a disclaimer, when discussing fiqh issues, especially fiqh issues that have a deep impact on the lives of people, it's very, very important to note that fiqh addresses basic parameters, boundaries, but it doesn't necessarily mean if something is okay in the realm of fiqh, it's what you should do or it's what is optimal to be done. So I just put that out there just as a disclaimer. Each situation, especially like living arrangements, travel, needs to be considered from multiple standpoints, even if something would be hypothetically allowed based on scholarly difference, it doesn't mean that one should necessarily do it or not do it. And, after that, there was a few issues that you mentioned. The first one about living arrangements. There's nothing in our deen that spells out that a woman cannot live alone, provided that there's safety and well-being is secured. It's not in a place that puts her at risk in any way or exposes her or her integrity or reputation in any way. So that's about living space. Where should she live? The issue of travel is a more complicated one, because it involves understanding that the reality, certain realities to travel. In general, in our tradition, when travel is spoken about, it's spoken about uh, as being a form of trial or difficulty or hardship and heartache. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says, "As-safaru qit'atun min al-adhab," especially in pre-modern times, because travel involved so much risk and so much danger, and it involved the person being alone for long amounts of time, perhaps days on end. And so some aspects of travel still remain. There is still some elements of danger depending on what type of travel you're speaking about. So the traditional opinion, historically, was definitely not in favor of a woman traveling alone. That's the traditional opinion. And the only exceptions that they would speak about it is in the context of going to perform Hajj with a rufqa al-amina, a group of a trusted group of individuals, as opposed to without the mahram. The mahram, what is a mahram? A mahram is a relation to the woman, someone that the woman cannot get married to, like a sibling, a parent, so that's or um, uh, you know a father-in-law. That would also count as a mahram, and there's other maharim beyond that. So that would be the alternative in Hajj for a rifqa al-amina. Now, the reality today, some scholars today have addressed this, with a little bit more detail, stating that since there is a greater potential for safety and security in travel today, as opposed to the past, some scholars today are a lot more flexible about issues of travel relating to women traveling alone. But the question stating like going to school or going to work or the rest, that's outside of the question. That's, of course, that's okay for a woman to go out alone for work, school, and the rest. The question historically was, can a woman go a far distance of travel alone or not? And it's important to understand the context of the past and the context of the present, and to realize that most fiqh issues are not areas of agreement. So the historic traditional opinion would not be in favor of it. Many modern scholars, considering the realities of travel today, would allow it. Wallahu alam. Sheikh Yasir, if I've missed any part of the question, please add to it.
Jazakallah kulla khair, Sheikh Osama. I think you covered the major corners of that question. I did want to share kind of as an extension to this question. And first off, it's very hard to answer a question theoretically, especially fiqh, especially if someone's asking for a specific reality. So, I think the questioners tried to be as specific as possible, but it's always better to, talk to a sheikh directly and get broader context, so that broader context is understood, and then, a more guided response can be given, because very often the challenges or the questions we're asking about are not really purely resolved through fiqh. You need more than just fiqh to resolve these questions. But regardless of that, the second thing is, I think the questioner is clearly asking very pragmatic questions, like, can I go to work? Can I go to school? Can I travel? Certainly, if there's abuse, that I think changes the question, which is the questioner saying, like, what if there's abuse? Then certainly, that's a reason and a justification to have to, do things independently without a mahram, etc. So there is a lot of I think important conversations that can be had around when a woman needs to do things independently in general, travel, live on their own, things like that. There may be circumstances in life that come about where it requires the woman to do that, and the Sharia certainly accommodates need and so on. The one extension now that I wanted to share was that there is, perhaps outside of this question, there is a discourse today around the question of mahram that almost problematizes the idea of a mahram. And why does a woman have to? And I think that, without getting too deep into it, I think the enterprise or the institution of if you will, mahramhood, the idea of a mahram is a very powerful institution. It in the most ideal circumstances, it offers, a type of stability, security, protection, financial security. It offers all sorts of services, khidma. So, representation for, other men who are interacting in the woman's life know that this woman has men behind her, etc. So yes, there are very often the case when the mahram is not acting like a man, not fulfilling his responsibilities, not being a good mahram, and so they're deadbeats, right? But I want us to just frame it that mahram, the idea of a mahram, is a very powerful institution in Islam. It's one that we as a Muslim community want to protect and preserve. We certainly don't want to do away with it. And that, under the conditions of need and necessity and difficulty, there may be, then a need to do things independently or on one's own. But to standardize the idea of like pure independence, do everything that I want as I want it, whenever I want it, that's not something the Sharia really allows for men or women. Men and both women have responsibilities and duties that they have to fulfill. And the Sharia actually, it endorses an idea or a philosophy of responsibility. You're a garment for them, they are a garment for you, etc. So I just wanted to share that quick thought as an extension of this question.
Barakallah fikum, mashayikhna. I'm sure something will come to me. There's a follow-up question to that.
It looks like you're trying to push back, but you don't have what you don't have the.
I feel the urge to push back.
Exactly, you have the urge, but you don't have the words. Like, how do I push back right now?
Well, there's also yeah. Tfadal, Sheikh.
Oh, go ahead, Maulana.
No, Sheikh. Go ahead. It's a joke. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to hear the joke, man. I guess what you could really trace back the difference to is the issue with women traveling historically or in the prophetic tradition, because there's a hadith about it, right? Is it ma'qul al-ma'na or is it ta'abbudi? That's basically what the discussion, legally speaking, is about. Ma'qul al-ma'na is something, is it for a particular meaning or concept that could be derived from it, or is it purely ta'abbudi, meaning for the sake of servitude and devotion? If it's for the purpose of servitude and devotion, then you really just got to stick to what the statement in the hadith literally says. And that statement in the hadith is that it is unbefitting for a woman who believes Allah on the last day to travel the distance of a day and night except with a mahram. So when you read that hadith from our prophetic tradition, if I say that this is ta'abbudi and for servitude and devotion, I really can't go beyond the hadith. But most things in fiqh are not for the sake of ta'abbud, especially when you get out of the realm of the acts of worship, right? So the scholars who looked at that prophetic tradition and said it is ma'qul al-ma'na, it is because of the sake of fear, and for the fear for her safety, fear for her reputation, then in that regards, if that element of fear is removed from the equation, should the ruling then change or not? That's basically what the issue is. So many people would have different takes on this. So this is an area that's subject to difference. Our fiqh tradition is not one that is set in stone. Largely, there is an element, there's a realm of acceptable difference between the fuqaha. So some people would approach this and say, well, you know what, traveling from airport to airport alone, from family to family, reduces the risk of danger to the extent that it's almost insignificant. But some other people would have a much more conservative approach, and they would not even allow that, traveling from airport to airport, if it's to go to visit family or to complete some other need. So it's important to accept these things are not binaries, right? So to be honest with you, even the issue of living alone, if you go to our legal tradition, there is, even for a man to live alone, there is that it's established in our tradition that that's something that's makruh, that's something that's offensive. But the reason for that is something else, because when the shaitan is further away from the jama'ah, from a group, but when the individual is alone, that exposes him to one risk or another. So male or female, that same logic applies. So I hope that the listeners take that into consideration. Not every single difference of opinion needs to be approached in a very dogmatic way. It's not certainly in our fiqh tradition. Yeah.
I think now that Sheikh Osama said that, I want to share something else as well, which is that it's also important to realize that the fuqaha of today fully appreciate very often, or many of the fuqaha appreciate the fact that the context of how we live and the nature of how we live has drastically changed. Societies in general were far more familial, tribal oriented, historically, where a person kind of was embedded in a network of family members. That was the standard and the status quo. The nature of the unfortunate development in the modern world is that we've been individualized, we've been dismembered. So we don't, we no longer live with our amongst our ashira, like our family, our extended family. And so in that context, accommodating some of the nuances of fiqh become a bit more challenging, even in the context of those differences of opinion, right? So let's say even if it's in the context of ta'abbudi, that it's something that you're doing as pure devotion, and there's no rationalizing of this ruling, it's just devotion for the sake of devotion. Even in that context, very often, given the difficulty of the circumstances that we live in, there may be a dispensation, right? An exception to the rule, because of the fact that it would be extreme haraj, for example, for a woman to travel with a mahram, because let's say the cost of travel, you're talking sometimes an airline ticket can cost an extra $4,000 or $5,000. Are we going to expect the mahram to have to save so that airline, that's a lot of haraj, right? And so, the fiqh also accommodates and recognizes the extent of the haraj meaning the hardship that may go into a particular decision that's made, right? So, I think all of this hopefully colors the question of mahram, and it's not just black and white, because people, we tend to reduce things. A women can't travel without mahram. That's all it is. No, it's a far more nuanced conversation that factors in many, many, many issues in the process. But I really hope and pray that our institutions that the Sharia has identified and established are ones that we want to protect and preserve. The institution of the family. I am a huge advocate of us going back to a greater familial tribal orientation, not tribalism. I mean family, extended networks, because that's where a lot of wellness and welfare exists, when you're embedded within a family, relationships, economic welfare, social welfare, mental health and emotional wellness and welfare happens in the space of, being embedded in a communal space. Like Sheikh Osama said, the shaitan does stay away from the jama'ah. Yadullahi ma'al jama'ah, and the aid and the support of Allah is with the group. So, inshallah, may Allah protect our families and our community and bring us back to, a more traditional orientation. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala.
Yeah, and Jazakumullah khair, Shuyukh. I do actually have a follow-up question to that. Before I do, I just want to make a comment. Sheikh Osama said when he mentioned that point about, even for a guy, there's a questioning of whether, like, it might even be makruh for a guy to live alone, and the reason being that the jama'ah is a protection for you. It struck me how, like, in today's, like, in American culture today, to strike out on your own is viewed as an accomplishment, a major accomplishment, and to not be living alone is to be viewed as failure. And so it was, I think, just if you were listening to that, I think it's worth reconsidering that paradigm a little bit. Subhanallah. I also appreciate the fact that our two mashayikh, as always, are sort of expanding our understanding of all that goes into the fiqh. I have, I guess, a bit more of a not philosophical, but paradigm question for you when it comes to the mahram. One of the reasons why I think a lot of people take such a strong visceral reaction to the mahram, even though the questioner didn't seem to have this, she was asking what seemed to be a very pragmatic question. Yeah. But since you mentioned it, I think a lot of people who have a sort of visceral reaction to it, the concern is more, there's this idea that the concept of a mahram is about control, and it's about authority. And I guess I just want to put the question, is that how it's been traditionally understood within the religion? Like, is the question or the point of a mahram, is it about authority and control? And if not, what is it about? And if it is about authority and control, can you explain that a little bit or expand upon that a little bit for those who are listening?
Well, I guess, I'd love to hear from Sheikh Yasser, but one point I can put out there is it's very important not to have a very, very subjective approach to religious teachings, taking some and leaving out others. And in this regard, I know that sometimes the nature of relationships gets very complicated. And sometimes one of the go-to things to sort of have like ammunition against another is religious teachings. Sometimes people weaponize religious statements to try to impose themselves upon those around them, and that was not a prophetic disposition. So that's the first thing I want to get out there, that's not who Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. And anyone who tries to do that with the statements of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is in grave and egregious error. So that's one. And the second reason why I mentioned that is because if one wants to take that approach to the concept of mahramiyah, of there being a mahram, it's all about control and I'm in charge, then one must not forget the fact that Allah and His Prophet, the teachings of our deen, and the statements of our legal tradition also made the recognition of a suitable mahram on the basis of adala, of justice, of uprightness, right? In fact, in the books of fiqh, when they speak about the issue of marriage, they say that the one who has the right to, quote unquote, marry off the girl is the father, provided that he is adl and he's just and upright. If he's a fasiq, if he's someone who's very abusive, if he's an oppressor, if he's someone who is actually out to ruin her life, sometimes that's the reality of some people, even though it's contrary to the norm. It's something that is, very aberrant in terms of what the human fitrah should lead to, a sound human fitrah. But if that's the reality, then they mention in the books of fiqh, then the right of wilaya goes from the father to the next person in line. And they actually mention a lineup of individuals who have this right. So it's definitely not about wrongfully imposing. But this idea of there being a sort of a familial structure to our communities, like Sheikh Yasser was mentioning in the previous point, is something that is actually in favor of the woman, in favor of society as a whole. So those are some insights. I'd love to hear what Sheikh Yasser is going to add.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikhna. I think that I think certainly it's not a question of control. I mean, the Sharia is not about empowering people just for the sake of a man having control over a woman. I mean, that's not the language of the Sharia. That's not the approach of the Sharia. The Sharia essentializes virtues, safety, wellness, security, betterment, etc. It seeks to preserve. There's the idea of the maqasid of the Sharia, the purposes of the Sharia, the preservation of health and lineage, and the preservation of wealth and religion, and so on and so forth. So, the Sharia is about maslaha. As many of our ulama in our history have indicated, لجلب المصالح ودرء المفاسد. It is to bring about good and to ward off harm. Okay, so that's everything that the Sharia is centered around: virtues and values and morals. So in this context, as Sheikh Osama very beautifully pointed out, there is something called of the fuqdan of the mahramiyya, that you can actually lose your status as a mahram. I deal with situations very often where a father is belligerent, is offensive, is neglectful, doesn't care for his responsibilities or his duties towards the person that he has a mahram relationship with, and then in all of that neglect and all of that harm, expects, right, that they are going to be given the deference as the mahram, and that expectation is false. And in the Dawla Islamiyya, the imam or the qadi or whatever could certainly say, sit aside, buddy. Like you don't get to act like a fool and then come and say, well, I'm a man here, you gotta respect me as a man. No, you gotta maintain your status as a man. If you want the deference as a man, right, you have to maintain your status as a rajul, right? But now you're acting like something sub that, right? So I would say that yeah, that's the words that came to mind. But I would say that we should appreciate this when it exists, and we should seek it when it doesn't exist. We should seek, mashallah. I mean, there are ammus in our community, right? That many of, and some of them are known, many of them are not, but that actually operate as maharim, de facto maharim, for a number of sisters or women in the community who don't have access to good, strong, representative men who can help and support and aid. And these things are like, people may take issue with the word strong. Like, what do you mean? Well, I can't be strong independently? That's not the point. I mean, we need to, this discourse of the modern world, it's like, pinning man versus woman. And it's like the perpetual battle of females versus males. I'm sorry, this is a construction that I categorically reject. This is about, the believing men and the believing women, awliya'u ba'dihim li ba'd, that they are awliya, they are friends and supporters and aids. So there's an intrinsic connection between men and women that is predicated upon beautiful values and virtues, and there's roles and responsibilities and duties and things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects of a man to fulfill and a woman to fulfill. So it's a very beautiful, harmonious thing, rather than this very reductionist, ugly, like, I'm a man, you're a woman, let's fight. Like, we need to do away with that nonsense. And it's really paining our communities, because there's a lot of suffering based on these, I would say, and it's not, I'm not saying that there aren't bad men and men haven't been behaving badly. Yes, there are men who behave badly and are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, but we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair. So take away, men be men and don't be sub that.
So you know me. Come on, you know me. Come on, you gotta embrace the language.
All right, let's do a couple of I guess simpler questions, inshallah, and then we'll get to another heavy one. So one simple one, or lighthearted one, I guess. If someone passes gas while they're in the midst of salah, does it still break their wudu and therefore invalidate their salah? Do they need to leave their salah to make wudu, or can they continue praying? And I thought it was an important question to answer, given the fact that it deals with salah.
Absolutely.
So تفضل شيخي.
This is actually a big question, Sheikh Zaid. يعني.
تفضل.
Allah يحفظك يا رب.
This is why we have people of knowledge on the call.
Jazakallah khair. You know, it's not too big, inshallah. Sahla, sahla, inshallah. But I just to expand it a bit, you know, it's very important to realize that our fuqaha take into consideration when addressing this issue the reality that some people have what we call a waswasa. There's this concept of waswasa, you know, people who you know, in fact, you know, today it's, you know, it's often referred to as like an obsessive compulsive disorder. And for some people, you know, approaching the issue of worship can actually be very tormenting for this reality. It's a test from Allah Azza wa Jal. I know of people who, when they try to go make wudu, they might spend 15, 20 minutes trying to do that. When they're in prayers, they're constantly having this anxiety that their prayers are invalid and not accepted. So it's important to take that into consideration. Islam does not want that to be my experience with worship. That's one. The second thing is the fuqaha also have a principle they employ in worship and in other subjects, and that is al-yaqeen la yazulu bishak, that certainty is not, the ruling of certainty is not removed with the presence of doubt. And that's certainly applicable here, because I'm certain that when I entered my prayers, or I guess that's what we're supposing, when I entered my prayers, I had wudu. Now I have a doubt. Did that certainty change with the passing of gas or not? If I doubt it even slightly, then I'm not going to overturn that certainty I entered my prayers with because of this doubt that came along the way. So that's why there's actually a hadith that says that the shaitan comes to a person in his prayer and makes him feel as though he passed gas. So he should not leave his prayer until he hears a sound or smells a smell. And of course, that's not meant literally, at least, you know, I don't know what the Malikiya would say, but the Shafi'iyya, they would not say that's not meant literally, but it's meant to indicate that it needs to reach to that level of certainty. If I'm certain I lost my wudu, then of course I must leave my prayers, even if I did not smell anything or even if I did not hear anything, provided that I'm really certain and provided that I'm not muwaswas, that I don't have waswasa. You know, if I'm waswas or that I have this obsessive compulsive disorder, then I should not pay any attention to these thoughts that come along the way. Do the worship as you know it to be, and inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept. Don't give any consideration to them. So I would take special caution with that. Allah alam. I don't know if you have anything to add.
If I can I just want to like sort of recap what you said, Sheikhi, because you went very large, like you went into like a lot of detail and then came back to the basics. So the fundamental basic is if you do pass gas during salah, from what you said, you break your wudu, you should leave it. However, you were describing what happens if you're unsure if you actually like, or you have some doubt. I don't know which happens. I don't know if I actually pass gas or not. And if somebody has that general issue where they generally question themselves quite a bit, you're asking them to be careful and you're giving them the parameters of how to know that, you need to know for certain that you pass gas in order for it to break it. And if you're not certain, then you can continue your salah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. I don't know if Sheikh Yasser wants to add something to this answer.
No, just very briefly. I think there's other considerations potentially if someone has a particular condition, like for example, there are those who have they have conditions where they can't control their bowels, in terms of urine or even passing gas. Like, so in those cases, right, there is a distinct ruling for those people, which is, before prayer you make wudu and then you enter into prayer, and even if something leaks out or something passes out, like, outside of your ability, then inshallah that's ma'dhur. You just continue your prayer because of that condition that a person has, and that usually is like it's a more consistent condition. It's not like a one-off thing, right? The second thing is in terms of doubtfulness. The Malikiya are a little bit different than the Shafi'iyya in this, in terms of tahara in particular, but I don't want to go down that path. We're going to stick with what Sheikh Osama kind of mentioned as, because number one, he is the sheikh of, on this panel. أنا here I'm a ضيف. يعني شيخ والشيخ وأنا ضيف.
اتق الله يا مولانا. أنا الضيف يا عم الشيخ.
No, but in the Malikis do have a slightly different consideration for shak in tahara, and so where yaqeen lies, and so and they don't actually consider tahara something that you can can apply shak to, right? So the standard is if you have any doubt, you go and make wudu. But the Shafi'iyya, they have a different, if you're certain that, for example, you prayed or you have tahara and you're doubtful about whether or not you did pray, or I'm sorry, with tahara in particular, if you did or did not break your wudu, then you stick with what you know, which is you have wudu, and you move on. And we'll just stick with that, inshallah, for the broader audience. We don't need to get into the details of the madhahib. But perhaps Sheikh Usama can elaborate from the Shafi'i perspective about this, which is the rate at which someone has doubt, because the Malikiyya do talk about, like, there's a difference between someone doubting something like once in a while, once a day, every salah, like so the rate of doubt also affects how someone may apply or not apply that doubt. Meaning to say that, for example, let's say in the Maliki school, if in every salah in the span of a day, more than once, you find yourself, like I said, 2-3 times in a day, you find, did I pray 3 or 4 rakahs? Did I pray 4? Like, if you have that, then you eliminate that doubt. You move forward, because that doubt is waswas, right? It's coming from a negative place. But if once in a while you're doubtful, then you can take precaution, right? Because that's not necessarily, it doesn't feed into the notion of waswas, or the obsessive compulsiveness that Sheikh Hussein was talking about. So I just want to know what the Shafi'is say, because I'm not 100% sure about, do you even have a conversation about the rate at which this happens? Because the Malikis talk about this, like they actually limit it to a day, right? So, in the span of a day, if it happens once, it's not considered, doubt that is applicable, but it happens more than once in a day, then it becomes factored in.
Yeah, by us, we don't have that type of discussion, or as far as I know, I don't know of any discussion about ratio of doubt, but I know that there's no dabit in it in the shara, and generally what the Shafi'iyya say is ما لا ضابط له في الشرع فمرده إلى العرف, that which has no specification in terms of shara and Islamic law, then we go back to the a'raf and the what's generally accepted as someone being a person who is plagued by waswasa or not. That would be something very subjective. It would need to be going back to Ahl al-Khibra, and of course in this type of arena, because for us in pre-modern times, they would refer to it in our tradition as waswas, but here in today's age, we also have actually the obsessive compulsive disorder. Like if someone is diagnosed by that would be yani qawl ahl al-khibra, for that disorder. But for the waswas in general, it would be something subjective, I guess decided by the mufti. Yeah.
Barakallah fikum.
I think we took that question to a different...
went to a whole different level.
Yeah.
Actually, I laughed in the middle of the question at one point, because I remember when Sheikh Yasser first came back from Egypt, I was sitting in a class with him about like personal fiqh. And we were talking about this issue of like ratio of doubt. And there was one student who kept asking, so we're talking about like percentages, right? So if you're like more than 51%, and he kept insisting on that until Sheikh Yasser was like, just drop the percentages thing, man. Just listen to what I tell you.
That was that was the discussion about, that was actually usul al-fiqh, because we were talking about the degrees of ma'rifah. There's like yaqeen, dhan, shak, wahm.
There we go.
So we broke it down into, the scholars sometimes break it down to percentages. If it's 75 plus, it's yaqeen. If it's 50 to 75, it's dhan. If it's 50, it's shak.
Sheikh, what if it's 75.7?
Oh, exactly. I think that's where
that was the question. Yeah, that's
like, just forget about the percentages.
Alhamdulillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The next question. A brother or a sister are saying that they converted to Islam at the beginning of this year. Alhamdulillah. May Allah bless them and give them steadfastness, inshallah. And they're trying to navigate their relationship with their non-Muslim family. The non-Muslim family has been very kind and accepting of the new Muslim family member. But the biggest issue is that they drink wine every day at their meals and when they go on like vacation and holiday together. They don't get drunk, as the person is describing, and they don't offer him or her any drinks. But the person wants to know what their obligations are. Do they have to ask their family not to drink around them at all, even if he or she is visiting them in their home? If they pay for his or her ticket to go on the vacation, do I ask them not to drink while they're on vacation? Do I ask them when we go out, like when I'm around you, do you have to stop drinking? So he or she is saying that they're trying to limit how often they're exposed to the alcohol, but they're not sure. They also don't want to come off as disrespectful to their parents and their extended family members. So they're not sure exactly how to navigate this and what their obligations are when it comes to being around their non-Muslim family members and alcohol.
Again, it's another very involved question. I think it's very important to consider that there's a few different factors at play here. So going from the default ruling, aside from this person's special circumstance, generally speaking, I as a Muslim am strongly urged, in fact, perhaps required, to avoid gatherings where there are kaba'ir being performed, especially specifically like the drinking of alcohol and all the rest. That's not a type of environment that I'm encouraged to be around. That's default ruling, void of circumstance. But now we have another consideration, given this person's special circumstance, the fact that this person's family is not Muslim. And there is an important maqsad shar'i that this person manages. There's an important objective by Islamic law that this person manages those expectations, those emotions of the people that he's dealing with, because it intersects with da'wah. If this person completely severs ties with family after becoming Muslim, it will send a very, very negative message to the family about what Islam or religiosity has done to their son or daughter. And that's why it's something that it's sort of an art form. There needs to be certain parameters that are established. Yes, certain conversations that need to happen, but those need to happen very delicately, because we're talking about human emotions here. The Prophet ﷺ was asked by one of the women companions, my mother reached out to me, and she is a mushrika, she is a polytheist. Should I fortify the ties of parenthood, or should I do birr and benevolence to my mother? The Prophet ﷺ told her, yes, sali ummaki, reach out to your mother, maintain that connection. So that needs to be considered when addressing this. How can I maintain that connection without compromising my values? And that's something that needs to be delicately done. I think it should be done slowly. And at a certain point, a conversation should happen where the person, makes it very clear that the rights of the parents will be maintained and the rights of the family are ongoing. And in fact, Islam made me a person who has greater family ties with my relationship, recognizing my duty and responsibility to them, but at the same time, trying your best to avoid those part of the gatherings, and reducing them, gradually speaking. I had that same question come up, because especially with Christmas coming around the corner, some converts having to deal, or some reverts having to deal with that reality where their family is celebrating, and they have to make a decision whether to celebrate, quote unquote, or not. So I think, wallah alam, those are some insights to the question. I'd love to hear from Sheikh Yasser.
And Jazakallah kull khair. I actually think that was very beautifully put and sufficient in all ways, mashallah. I would just reiterate a few critical points and highlight them. First off, it's really appreciating that conversion for a family, a non-Muslim family, of a family member. It's such a earth altering reality for a number of families, right? It's just like we have our standard, our culture, our habits, our behaviors, and then you change your religion, and then it's like it just shocks the system of our family, right? And some Muslims have this orientation, well, they should just accept you for who you are, and if they don't, then you should turn away from them, etc. That's not the case. I would say that Sheikh Osama put it beautifully. It is an art form. It's managing a relationship. You're trying to maintain a type of kinship and bond with your family, that you love, and that you love rightfully, and we should care for our family members and seek for them the best and wellness and so on. And certainly we want our families who don't practice Islam to see something beautiful about Islam, that Islam is not just a set of very blunt and rigid rules, right? And it's just black and white, and the akhlaq and the muamala and the approaches is not there. The Prophet ﷺ spent many years establishing the theological and spiritual foundations of Islam, and then a lot of the more direct rulings came in the Medinan period, right? In the latter part of the Prophet's life. And so I think we should try to channel all this when we're thinking about our relationships with our families. Certainly, yes, the standard is that we should not be in spaces where alcohol is being consumed and flowing, and we should limit how often or how much we have to be in those spaces. And so I would encourage two things. Certainly, as Sheikh Osama said, when you're in those spaces, trying to limit your proximity to those things, right? If you can, as thoughtfully as possible. You're not necessarily, like, let's say everyone's kind of outside drinking, you're inside, let's say, just helping out with the dishes or cleaning up the table or something, just keeping yourself busy, pulling someone off for a conversation, trying to stay away from some of that where those things may be happening. The second thing is, I think it's so important from a place of love and care to develop a conversational relationship where it's not like a demand or an aggressive expectation, but rather it's from a place of rahmah and mercy and harmony and care, that, hey, listen, if it's okay, mom, if it's okay, dad, hey, brother, hey, sis, listen, can we, this is the case, that's the case, I'm trying, whatever, and you have a heartfelt conversation. And listen, sometimes families are very accommodating, I know that case, and sometimes families make it as a point. Oh, you're not going to drink alcohol, you're not going to eat pork, here, I'm going to put it right in front of your face, right? And I've seen both, and I know that it's a spectrum, it's not black and white. How to negotiate this is very contextual and subjective to the specific person. But opening a line of communication and conversation where it's meant to be like predicated upon love and care and a connection, and then trying to like gradually open up those conversations is certainly something we should keep in mind, inshallah.
If you don't mind me just commenting on a couple of things, and please, sure. My dear Sheikh, correct me or note or fix what I say if there's any mistakes in it. The first one is a lot of what you said in your answer was about maintaining a sense of love. I do just want to say, just because it wasn't stated explicitly, there's no expectation also that the person who is converted to Islam is supposed to not have that support system of their family anymore, right? Like their family remains their family. And so there's even a need for the person themselves perhaps to keep a very good tie for themselves. Your parents will always be your parents, your siblings will always be your siblings, are always people that you can go back to and love. And so the relationship is also important for you as a person to maintain, and not just from a da'wah perspective. I think even just from a sort of mental health and general support perspective, as we were discussing earlier. And the second thing is, I've heard this question asked quite a bit, and I've at times been on panels with brothers who have a lot of knowledge, who are converts themselves. They converted to Islam much later in life. And I think it would be helpful, I don't know the person who's asking the question, if you are not currently linked in with support circles that are made up of brothers and sisters who are in the similar situation that you are, I would advise or gently advise or suggest that you find that out. I know ICPC has one. We have the Converts and Reverts Committee, and I do know in Central Jersey at MBIC, with Brother Ilyas, there's a very, very active group. And I know that they go through this type of conversation. And I think what happens there is you're going to get a lot more of that out for them, all right, that comes out, because you're going to have people who kind of deal with this on a day-to-day basis who might have a lot more psychological insight than people who have grown up, alhamdulillah, around Muslim families their whole lives. So I hope that was okay, Sheikh Yassin and Sheikh Osama. All right. I'm going to jump forward a little bit in the questions, just because we have a question that's kind of come in for a few weeks and we've never gotten to it. And then I'll go back to some of the others. So there's a general question that came up, especially a couple of weeks ago when we did our conversation around addiction and drug abuse. When we were talking about marijuana, there were questions around practical tips on how to quit addictions, and then practical tips on how to curb perhaps feelings of depression. And while we did address it a little bit in that episode, the episode was by and large was not about that, right? We kind of got into that at the end. And we had that question come up a couple times again tonight. So I just wanted to pose it out and see if there were any additional thoughts or rehash some of the suggestions that we had on that last one. So do we have any tips on how one can stop a behavior that they're doing repetitively? From the nature of the question, I don't think it's an actual addiction. But assuming it is, you can give the clinical suggestion there. But it seems to be more of like, I keep falling into this bad habit. I can't seem to stop. And then I think the person's being linked, that bad habit is sort of linking that person into a state of depression or feeling a sense of depression. So what tips do we have for people who are struggling with that?
Bismillah. And a few things that come to mind, about first, I guess, about the issue of depression. When addressing any mental health issue, I think it's good to start off with making the difference between something that is clinical and something that is just from is the resultant of the day-to-day struggles of life. If someone is clinically depressed, then there are certain means and avenues to try to address that. And I think it's important. Actually, my khutbah today was about mental health struggles, our reality and our responsibilities. So I guess if it's clinical depression, that's one thing. If it's a result of day-to-day struggles, then of course there's so much in our tradition to help us manage through stressful situations that cause us anxiety, that cause us depression. It'll bring us to the discussion about what impact does faith and iman really have on mental health issues in that regard. And it's a really big realm, being intact with our soul and the nature of our relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal, having a support system around us, having healthy releases as opposed to very negative ones. So I think it's a lengthy discussion, and it needs an episode by itself for the subject of addictions, the subject of mental health issues. About addictions, like you said, if they're often associated with vicious cycles, things that are cyclical, things that are difficult to break out of. And when addressing something that has become habitual, a negative habit, it's important to understand and examine what caused that to come about in the person's life. I'll be very honest, a lot of these emotional issues need to be handled and managed by a mentor, someone who's an expert, someone who has a depth of understanding, because sometimes you need an objective take on some of the things that have come to be in your life. So that would be one advice. The other thing is, if it's something cyclical and it's a vicious cycle, then it's just making tawbah and doing some adhkar and reading some Quran is not going to end it. And that's a thing. Some people, they feel very frustrated because they try to be good people and they try to break out of that negative cycle, but they find themselves constantly going back to it. And the reason is because the stressors that have led to that negative habit are not being addressed, the underlying causes. And I think that's the way to really break out of it. Figure out what's triggering this every time it comes around. Is it certain companionship? Is it certain feelings of loneliness? Is it certain life challenges? That needs to be figured out in order to be able to resolve it. Those are some thoughts. I'm sure the subject is immense. You could add a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's a big topic. Perhaps just some bullet point ideas for the questioner to think about is the operative word here is habit, and habits develop through time and through process. We develop habits because we do things regularly and consistently, and so there is a lot of merit to in terms of trying to break a habit. You kind of have to re-engineer the process. So if I developed a habit, for example, of watching something every night or doing something every night, or whatever my habit is, right? Then I have to then spend a proper amount of time, and very often they say it's 40 days, right? And there's even some indication of this in the Sharia, this number 40, but it's a different conversation, that 40 days consistently, help you to develop habits. So if inshallah, let's say you have a particular habit, you try to, be mindful that if I want to break free of this habit, I have to develop a new habit that's attached to this thing, and it does take time, so let's say someone's been doing something for 2-3 years straight, and then they think that just cold turkey it's gonna just one night I decide it stops, and it stops officially and finally. I mean, that's it's actually a big challenge. So you need to realize that it's going to be a process. Inshallah, hopefully bi'idhnillah shorter, but a process. The second thing is really changing up routines and circumstances and contexts. And that's a big deal, because very often a part of our habituation or our habit building is we're accustomed to a certain thing. We like a certain, like, I'm going to come home at a certain time and I'm going to do, because this is when I like to watch something or hang out or whatever, smoke something, do something. And so the context plays a big role. What you have access to at what time and when, what do you do, what's around you when you're alone, that idle hands will certainly play. And so, being by yourself a lot in compromised states. So changing your context, spending time with people, spending a lot more time with good people, getting yourself very busy, with productive things to do, developing, having interests that are, that require you to be exhausted and busy, playing sports or working out, or um, you know, any type of habit really that's productive. Could be
Reading.
woodworking, huh?
Reading, woodworking.
Reading, woodworking, just productive things that really keep your mind busy and keep your body busy. So it's not, breaking free of habits is not just something you're going to think it away. You have to kind of work your way through an alternative way, because you have time and you have energy and you have your mind and you have interest and you have your nafs. That's what Sheikh Osama was indicating. There's a lot that's happening. So if it's not channeled in the right direction, it's going to default, and it's going to default to to pleasure, to the nafsani stuff. And so yeah, it does require a type of proactivity, shifting and altering and doing it consistently until you develop a new habit and a new routine, right? And I can tell you, I mean, myself, for example, I didn't grow up enjoying reading at all. I was not a reader by any stretch of the imagination. Until even when I got into high school, I still wasn't a reader. And then I really, at the age of roughly 16, I started to really push myself. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna become a reader. And it was a grind on a regular basis to do it until there's a moment where it broke, broke free, and it became something that's genuinely enjoyable to sit down and read. And you find nourishment and excitement and happiness and a rush, and you're actually looking for your book. It's like, where's my book? I want to get back to my book. But that, and people may hear that, and especially young people, and laugh like, what is this guy talking about? But it's just because perhaps you've never tasted that pleasure and realize that it's far more pleasurable, than some of the bad habits that we think we get something out of, but it's nothing more than just a fleeting moment of elation. Allahu A'lam.
Barakallah fikum, Shaykh. If you don't mind, I'd want to just chime in a little bit. I think one thing that that both Sheikh Osama and Sheikh Yasser implicitly mentioned, was that at times, if you find yourself really overwhelmed with a habit, you have to accept the fact that you may need, in order for you to gain power back over that habit, you may need to go outside of yourself. Right. So Sheikh Osama mentioned finding a mentor or a big brother. Sheikh Yasser talked about changing context. A part of that might also be changing friends. It could be that some of the things that you do when you're around certain friends. So maybe you shouldn't, for the time being, until you grow enough strength over that habit, you have to change the type of people that you're around as well. You have to change the settings that you're in, right? So if you tend to do something when you're alone, don't be alone. Like don't fall into the demonic trick of like, okay, well, you're powerful enough to change this on your own. You shouldn't need anybody's help. And I know Sheikh Osama actually mentioned this in his khutbah today, where oftentimes people get this sense of pride that I don't want to go outside and ask for help. But if you feel like you have a negative habit that has become somewhat addictive that you really can't get over, you may have to just accept that, look, this is something that I need help with. And I have to go beyond me to get the right help. I have to find an older brother or a good friend or someone that I can trust, or my father or a family member, that will like empower me to get over this problem. And then the last thing that I wanted to add, please note, dear brother or sister who's asking this question, when you're trying to change sinful habits, there is an inevitable trip up that will come. It's not easy to get over this thing in one try or two tries or three tries, no matter what that addictive sin is. And do not let your nafs or the shaitan discourage you when you do that, right? So this journey outside of this sinful habit is going to be a long one where you're going to fail probably more often than you succeed in the beginning. Just keep making tawbah, renew your intention again. Allah is the most merciful. So long as you have a sincere intention that I'm going to keep trying, I'm going to keep trying, Allah will keep giving you power, and keep making dua, inshallah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you authority. So seek help outside of yourself. Don't allow the trip ups to hold you back. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for as much support and help as you possibly can, inshallah. Hopefully that helps out a little bit. Okay, I'm going to jump now. We're getting close to an hour, surprisingly. Our dear 6-year-old sister, Jannah al-Jindi, asks a question. She wants to know why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us.
It's all you, Sheikh Yasser.
Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create us? Well, what's her name?
Jannah.
Oh, Jannah. The answer is right there in your name. MashaAllah. He created you so you can go to Jannah, because that's why your name is Jannah. You see, because your parents loved you so much.
Yes,
And your parents loved you. So they love you so much because they love Allah so much. So they called you something so beautiful. They named you something beautiful, which is Jannah, and the hope that, inshallah, you and your mom and your dad and your whole family and your aunts and your uncles and your grandparents, and inshallah, your future family, everyone bi'idhnillah will go to Jannah together. And Jannah is the most beautiful place, far more beautiful than anything in this dunya. And it's the ultimate place, inshallah, where we will live and have everything that we can wish for. So Allah loves us, and Allah loves us so much as His creation. And He created us because He wants us to spend time with Him, worshiping Him. We like, don't you, Jannah, 6-year-old Jannah who's listening to me, inshallah, you love to be with the people you love, right? You love to talk to your friends and your parents and your siblings. Maybe not your siblings so much, but mostly your parents, right? You love to be, and don't you want to spend time with them? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created this dunya for us so that we can talk to Him, we can read the Quran, we can pray, we can worship Him, because Allah loves when we pray. Allah loves when we read the Quran. Allah loves when we're responsible and we're clean, and we take care of things, and when we're honest. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this dunya so we can do a lot of good things. We can help people, we can serve, we can be, selfless, meaning that we take care of others even before we take care of ourselves. So those are some of the reasons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us. And inshallah, your beautiful name, Jannah, is a foreshadowing, meaning that it's just the beginning of us all. Inshallah, you Jannah, you take us all to Jannah with you. All right, Jannah, you listen to me. You make sure we all go to Jannah together, Ya Rabbi.
Sheikh Osama, do you want to add anything?
I think Sheikh Yasser's answer is absolutely beautiful. May Allah
Allah
make it Jannah, inshallah.
By the way, just as a FYI, because I know we all love him. We all love Ammar Dilbi. This is Ammar Dilbi's niece who asked the question.
Oh, mashallah.
mashallah.
This is Kareem
and Nina's
Nina.
daughter.
Mashallah.
Yeah.
Subhanallah.
Well, Allah bless the whole family. They're very beloved to us, alhamdulillah. Okay, so the next question that we have, actually two people asked a question that's very similar. So I'll ask the condensed version of the question, and then I'll give a little bit more context from the far longer, more philosophical version of the question that came. So one question was, can you explain the verse or the part of the verses in the Quran that says, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها? And the person is asking, in terms of individuals whose tests lead them to suicide or depression or losing their sanity, how then are they unable to handle the struggle Allah has faced them with? Question meaning, are we to understand that these are people who are not able to face the challenge Allah Ta'ala gave them? And how does that reconcile with the verse or the statement in the Quran, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها? There was a much longer version of a question that asked, like, what is the nature of a soul and how much is man responsible for? Is it nature versus nurture? Is it environment or a person's individual actions? And I think both are kind of asking a very similar thing in some way. So how do we understand this verse or the statement in the Quran? It's not a verse in its entirety, that you can when we look at how people sometimes are overwhelmed by their circumstances, in some cases all the way to the point where they feel the need to take their own lives. And Sheikh Yasser is obviously off screen, so I'm going to unfortunately throw it to Sheikh Osama first.
He's back with us, Maulana.
It's too late. I already called you.
Can you summarize the question one more time, Ustaz Zaid?
So Allah says in the Quran, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. But we see in front of us oftentimes examples of people that it seems to us are overwhelmed by their circumstances.
Yeah.
So how do we understand that in light of this verse?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. I think it's actually a great question, subhanAllah, in that, this verse in particular, gives us perspective on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows we can handle if we follow measures, if we follow proper measures. Now, some people, when they recite this verse, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, they see it as a means to excuse them from something that Allah obligated them to do, or something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has indeed made a reality in their life. And that's not the way the verse should be read. It should be read that if Allah made this a reality that manifested in my life, He's only done so, subhanah, and He's only decreed so, subhanah, because He knows I can handle it. So that's I hope that the difference in approach is clear there. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها is not an excuse out of dealing with the realities in my life or the obligations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put upon me, but rather it actually should make me understand that if Allah has decreed it for me, then He knows that it's well within my reach to handle it as a believer. And I think that is important to distinguish. The reason why people sometimes fail with the challenges of life is because they don't take those proper measures, and they don't really make that effort to try to manage or address their difficulties and their struggles. It's not because they can't. If they made a conscious decision to actually do so, and they actually sought out the help that would enable them, they would actually be able to handle it. So I think, wallah alam, that's the answer to that question, and that's the perspective that the verse actually gives.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question, and I think the distinction is critical in that sometimes and very often uh, we experience this with our children. You'll tell your kid, take this and put it on the shelf, and they'll take it and they'll say, you can do it, don't worry, you can do it. It's like, no, no, it's too hard, I can't do it. No, no, you can do it. And then they go and you tell them, just but do it this way and you'll get it done. And they go to put it, and they're doing it the way they are thinking to do it, or they think they should do it, not really following the directives and the direction that was given to them by the one that knows more than them. And then in that context, you see them starting to really struggle, and then struggle to the extent of even crying and feeling, oh, I can't do this. And then when you go and you just make that like subtle tweak, it's like, oh, I can do this. It wasn't that hard. And of course, I don't mean to diminish anyone's challenges, especially if we're talking about people who've struggled with issues in their life so much that they led them to suicide. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm dismissing or belittling or diminishing for a second, but it's just to give a type of a likeness that perhaps brings the idea closer. So in this context, it's realizing that what we need to know inherently as a Muslim, because Allah is making a very clear declarative statement. And when Allah makes declarative statements, He's telling us the categorical truth, right? It's Allah saying, I do not burden you with more than what you can handle. So what does that mean? That means that effectively and absolutely everything that's happening in my life, I can handle it, right? Objectively speaking. And what that does is that puts me at a place where I realize I just have to learn the process to manage this thing. I have to learn the proper approach to deal with this reality that Allah has bestowed upon me. And I can promise you that very often we really suffer a lot because we so often try to figure this thing out called life, usually on our own. We try to process it and theorize it and use our basic common sense and our basic wisdom to negotiate, and it becomes all too often deeply overwhelming. And the fact is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave us the Quran, He gave us the Sunnah as a form of liberation, clarity, light, healing, guidance, etc., to be followed, to be listened, to be obeyed, so that going back to the earlier point, so that we can go into a place of benefit, maslaha. Allah gave us this for our benefit in this life and the next. Maslaha fi darain, right? Was sa'ada fi darain. Benefit in this life and the next, and happiness in this life and the next. So I would say that I should embrace that verse from the Quran as a declarative statement. It's telling me something about me, because what do I know? At the end of the day, what do I know? So wait, hold on. Ya Allah, you're telling me I can handle this? Yes, I'm telling you can handle this. Okay, good. Now I know that. So how do I handle this? How do I manage that? That's the question that you want to ask yourself. And that's where you want to go to people of knowledge, people of wisdom, people of guidance. How do I handle this? How do I manage this? What am I supposed to be doing? What kind of practices? What kind of thoughts? What kind of beliefs? What kind of understanding? What kind of relationships? Because in the reworking of that, just like similar to the example I gave of the child, when you just tweak that one thing, you realize, oh, I could have done this. It wasn't that hard, right? And so very often for us, it's a lot of tweaking that's needed. It's a tweaking of an understanding, tweaking of a perspective, tweaking of a behavior, tweaking of a reaction, tweaking of an expectation that very often makes it far, not just manageable, because that's not even what Islam has in store for us. Islam doesn't make it where we can just manage life and get through life. No, Islam makes it لِيُخْرِجَ النَّاسِ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ, to exit them from darkness into the vastness of light. So Islam gives you an orientation that helps you thrive. And that's what I hope and pray that all of us are exploring. What does Islam have in store for me that I myself haven't really sought out in all these years? Wallahu a'lam.
I have a couple of follow-up questions on this point. And if they're not areas that you want to go into, I completely understand. But at least one of the questioners, I got a sense that what was behind the question is that they may know someone who ended up taking their own life.
Yeah.
And so they may be asking the question, the real question that they may be trying to get to is there any room where that person is not held responsible for their action? They may not know that that's the question that they're really trying to get to, but I got a sense from the way the question was asked that might be what's happening. If the person, is there a room where a person has a mental instability or some sort of imbalance, emotional or mental or chemical, and they end up taking their own life where they're not held responsible? And I don't know if you guys want to get into that.
No, I don't mind getting into it. I mean, unless Sheikh Hussein wants to jump in first.
تفضل يا مولانا تفضل.
I personally have dealt with a number of suicide cases at this point, at least 6, and in 2 particular cases, there were suicide notes that I read, and I actually still have them. And those notes brought me to tears because of how powerful the words were, and how thoughtful, and how painful. And I don't think any scholar or sheikh of in Islam, and of course not every scholar or self-proclaimed sheikh is a true sheikh or whatever the case, but I'm talking about like scholar and shuyukh and people of ilm, would not identify the fact that there is genuine suffering that's taking place. There is a disease. There is something that like for example, someone who has a clear mental instability. For example, someone who was completely mentally not there and just jumped out of a window, and wasn't actually, killed themselves, but not because they wanted to, just because they weren't there. So that's clear. Everyone say, yeah, clearly this person is marfu anhu taklif, like they weren't kamilul qariha. Their mind wasn't fully in its wherewithal to process and know right, wrong, whatever. So we can fathom that. I think no one has a disagreement there. I think people maybe have some contention. It's like, well, someone is of sound mind, but they are in such a deep place of pain and suffering and darkness that they can't get out of, and they don't know how to get out of it. And perhaps they never had good guidance around them. They never had access to good guidance, and ultimately just led them to this place where, they walked out back and they did something to themselves or whatever. And in that place, there's certainly room in Islam to recognize that this person, went into such a painful, dark place in their life. It's not as if they were like celebrating the idea of killing themselves. It wasn't a celebratory act. It wasn't even sometimes like a necessarily selfish act, because some people say it's a selfish. It was like this person just was in such a dark place, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon those people, because those are not those people, they need the mercy of Allah, and they require the mercy of Allah. But certainly I would say that when I'm alive and I'm in my wits and I understand and I'm listening to scholars and teachers and mashayikh, and even if I have suicidal ideation, certainly I should seek out help and support. Call a suicide hotline. If you ever think that you're going down that route, call people that you love, because there's always people that love you deeply. And suicide is never the solution. It's never the solution. It's not the path that you ever want to take in life, right? And so, because there is a way out, and sometimes we see that the room is so dark, but there is a switch, and the switch can be turned on, and there is a pathway, bifadlillahi ta'ala, because Allah is Kareem and Allah is Rahim. Yeah, and if I'm trying to do it on my own, it's deeply painful. And especially, sometimes when, if I'm in that state, I prefer to go even to a darker place and move away from people even further. Someone that's close to me did this to themselves recently, where they went to a 6-month complete self-isolation, and they went to a very, very dark place, right? Extremely dark place. And bifadlillahi ta'ala, it was someone who happened to just call them and, and then called me and said, hey, so-and-so is in a really, really, really dark place. And so, we have to reach out to one another. We have to be expressive. We have to care. And, that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala al-afiyah.
Ameen.
And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make easy the affairs of those who have conditions that bring into such places. And like Sheikh Usama indicated earlier, sometime, and I think Zaid mentioned this, sometimes it certainly does require a mental health professional seeking out professionals and clinicians and therapists who are professionally qualified and equipped to negotiate those realities, but also seeking out, your mashayikh, your elders, your friends, your loved ones who can, be that beautiful relationship, like the surrounding that you have and the people that you connect with, inshallah. Allah.
Jazakallah khair, Maulana. If I may jump in just to add a few things here. And I actually spoke about this in the khutbah today too, about the, mental health issues and the reality of suicide. And, I actually benefited from something I found on the Family and Youth Institute website. Jazakumullah khair. I think they have a suicide prevention toolkit, and they mentioned some statistics. In a year, I guess in a recent year, the study's shown that 1.1 million suicides happened in the US, and every 12 minutes there's a suicide attempt. And how the Muslim community isn't immune to that, and it's a reality that we need to realize. It might come in many different forms, by someone hurting themselves physically, or sometimes through drug abuse and overdose, and it's very common. Sometimes these stories don't, make it to light for the whole community to know about. It's covered up, but the pain is there and the pain is real. I think what I was trying to do in the khutbah is to get people to realize that we all have an active role in trying to help people heal. About where a person will ultimately go in the akhirah, that's not really of great benefit to me to decide. That's not even something that's healthy or beneficial for me to get really involved and invested in. I should not want to pinpoint whether fulan or illan is going to be in Jannah or hellfire, because I myself don't know where I'm going to end up being. So I really think that it's some people, when suicide is brought up, immediately they jump to the ruling and how it's haram, and how the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever does this to themselves, then this will be their punishment. But the Prophet ﷺ and the prophetic character was one that was all about Jabr al-Khawatir, was all about helping people heal, was about helping people become better. And the example I gave in the khutbah was لا تقولوا هكذا لا تعينوا عليه الشيء لا تكونوا عونا للشيطان. The Prophet ﷺ, when he said to the companions who cursed a man who committed one of the kaba'ir, one of the companions, he said, أغزاك Allah, may Allah disgrace you. The Prophet ﷺ told him, don't say that. That's not your role. You're a healer. You're not a judge. You're a healer. You're not a judge. And, I think, everyone should really have this in mind, because sometimes these situations come about because of, great family pain, heartache, and no one really wants to be in that type of situation where constant feuding, bickering, and causing people to feel a sense of depression actually led them to go over the edge. People have a breaking point, and it's really important to realize that. Unfortunately, sometimes some families are devastated with a situation that could have been easily averted had we chose to manage our relationships in a healthier way. Allah Alam. That's just the only add-on I'd have there.
And I think this is Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Usama, for that, because it is very important that sometimes what happens is that people say, oh, look at you Shiyu, who are just kind of like obfuscating the truth. And no, those ahadith are true. Those ahadith are there. those are hadith. There's something that they don't belong to me. I don't own them. So there it's revelation. It comes down to us. But there certainly is the methodology and the approach of ta'ati هذه الأمور, how you negotiate them and engage them. So you affirm their truth, but then, as Sheikh Usama said, the enterprise of religious and prophetic engagement, يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة. There is a process. There is an approach. There's a methodology. There are factoring in. Listen, Sharia is never like some Sharia, and especially almost in the place of fiqh in particular. It's not a black and white reality. There's a lot of nuance, right? There's a lot of processing and procedural things that have to be taken in. And so it's neither a false sense of like absolute mercy, kind of like flowery concept of mercy detached of any like reality. And it's neither some black and white, rigid, dogmatic, like, thing. No, it's a process of Islam, Iman, and Ihsan, negotiating time and circumstances and realities. And as Sheikh Usama said, we are not meant to sit here in the dunya as judge, jury, and executioner and like put people and, destine people and damn people to places. No, yes, there is Jannah, there is Nar. An-naru haq wal jannatu haq. Hellfire is real. In things are haram and halal. Jannah is real. There's accountability, there's hisab. Allah expects some of the things we shouldn't do this, we should do that. All of those are mahfuz, preserved, and we want to try to do them to the best of our ability. But then there's negotiating the complexity and at times the messiness of the human condition and the human reality that you're trying to like bring closer to a place of mahabba, loving Allah, feeling trusted. Prophet ﷺ, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have not sent you but as a mercy to the worlds. He was sent as rahmah, and he was sent to beautify because he was beautiful. And he was sent sirajan munira, as a bright shining light. So the Prophet ﷺ was sent to, and the people, so beautifully, the people felt very open about coming forth with their, says Zayd, when you were munching something earlier, this came to mind, but I just figured I'd move on. But I'll share it in this context, is the man who came to said, Ya Rasulullah, I want to commit zina. Like I want to go and like sleep with a woman. Look at the openness, look at the forthcoming to come and speak to the Prophet ﷺ and to speak about what's in their heart. Dr. Sherman Jackson talks about this very often, where he says that, the way we operate communally is we create a lot of nifaq, a lot of hypocrisy. So you show one face here and then you show a different face somewhere else, right? So internally I'm something, but because of the culture of how we do Islam in the public sphere, it makes it where I have to put on a show, put on an image. I don't get to really express myself and talk about the things that I'm going through. And we have to create the spaces amongst ourselves, because we're all loved ones. Everyone who's listening here, we're all one thing. We're an ummah. We're one body. If one part of our body is in pain, then the rest of us are agonizing over that pain. We're not dismembered, we're not detached. And the hand cannot fool the mind, right? And the foot cannot fool the heart. It's all interconnected through the vascular system and the nervous system. And that's how we have to be, interconnected together, invested in each other's lives, humble with one another, selfless and caring, so that bi'idhnillah, the greatest betterment. And I love the imagery of the body and the pain of the singular aspect, one part of the body, and the rest of the body is, feverish and aware and awake. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heal us as individuals and heal us as an ummah, as a body, ya Rabbil Alameen.
Barakallah feekum. I have a second follow-up question to that, where we started with La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha, but I want to there's something happening in the comments on one of the streams that I just want to address very quickly. Sheikh Yasser and Sheikh Osama are both have both studied for quite a long time. They have ijazat. They would consider themselves, I think, student of knowledge, but they are sheikhs of their respective communities. And so they're speaking on the religion from a somewhat authoritative perspective. And when we're answering questions where we are not professionals or we don't have the full expertise, even Sheikh Yasser and Sheikh Osama are being very honest about that. And if some of the people who are joining us today don't know who we are, that's just because we do this program very regularly. We didn't spend time introducing each one of us. We tend to have the same people with us every week. So you might be able to go back and read, the individual Facebook pages of Sheikh Osama and Sheikh Yasser Unfortunately for me, I don't really have much of a public profile, so you'll just have to figure it out. But I'm really just facilitating today. I just wanted to clarify that because there seemed to be some questions coming up about what our professions were. Sheikh Yasser and Sheikh Osama are speaking from an authoritative perspective. They're not just du'at. They have studied, and they are people who have some authority in the religion, inshallah.
Don't you see all those books behind Sheikh Osama?
100%, exactly.
Yeah, well, that's ilm.
I did want to ask a secondary follow-up question based on the two questions that were related to one another on that ayah. So we spoke quite a bit about the circumstances leading one to suicide, but in general now, just as a more general perspective, like someone who's not going through that issue or to that extent, how much does Allah, when He judges a person, take the person's circumstances into consideration? The questioner is trying to get an understanding of if two people have extremely different life circumstances, they may naturally end up doing very different things, right? Someone who was born, in the slums of Punjab, for example, and never had exposure to some of the knowledge and circumstances as someone who was born, in Clifton, New Jersey. The two people are naturally going to come out very differently, right? So to what extent does Allah take a person's circumstances into effect? That's kind of the question that's being asked. I tried to summarize it for you. I think Sheikh Hassan was laughing because the question was very long. I was trying to condense it as much as possible.
No, I'm just smiling because smiling is a charity, Maulana.
A lot of charity, a lot of charity.
Yeah, Maulana, I think ultimately it's important to realize لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. And I think none of us are really in a position to really identify to what extent or how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala factors in His judgments and His decrees. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is for Allah, and I should leave it for Allah Azza wa Jal. To what extent, I wouldn't know how to answer that type of question. To be honest, with just, I think certain things are just best left to Allah Azza wa Jal. In the end of the day, I'm not in a position of judgment, especially if I'm talking about someone who has passed on, and that's actually, something that's actually a prophetic teaching, by the way. The Prophet ﷺ, he teaches us, as a hadith that says this, the Prophet ﷺ says, don't invest yourself in trying to investigate, pinpoint, analyze the ultimate outcome of someone who passed away. Someone who passed away, your role is very limited in their regards. Because their suhuf of amal has concluded. If you're talking to me about someone who's living and we need to do some arbitration, we need to resolve a conflict, we need to address someone who's doing some form of oppression, that's a different story. I'm going to examine it to the finest detail, and I'm going to address every single point that needs to be addressed. But when you're talking about someone who's passed on, this is the prophetic disposition. Udhkuru mahasina mawtakum. Mention the good things about those who passed on, and reserve judgment. Leave their judgment to Allah Azza wa Jal, because it is far better and far more superior than anything I could possibly conclude.
Barakallah. Just to clarify very quickly, that I think that this person was asking more philosophically, just a general understanding. I, as a human being, I've been put in circumstances that may have limited me. To what extent am I responsible to overcome those responsibilities? And to what extent will Allah have mercy on me for the circumstances that He gave me? I'm not sure that the questioner was asking about someone else. I think they were asking to better understand their own perspective, I think, or their own circumstances.
Yeah, fair enough. But I would say, just the best approach is one that's pragmatic, based in reality. Deal with what you have ahead of you, in front of you. Do what you can, and anything that's beyond your reach, hope in Allah Azza wa Jal. Hope in Allah. Don't have false hope in Allah that isn't based in your action, your efforts. And then, really, that's, Allah alam. I'm not sure if you guys would have a different take, I'd love to hear. But
Barakallah feek, Shaykh.
No, My simple answer would be as follows: don't overcomplicate it. The
Yeah.
dunya is not that complicated.
Don't
We
get
tend,
caught up in the what ifs. Yeah.
yeah, we tend to overthink the dunya, and we tend to over theorize and over philosophize the dunya. Prophet ﷺ speaks about the dunya in terms of the equivalent of a gnat, or the wing of a gnat, or a rotting carcass, and be in it like a passerby, or a stranger. And so you're not going to go to a terminal and start like theorizing the existence of this terminal. Like, you're going to go through the terminal, take what you need to know about it, know where the exits are, know where you can grab some food, know where you can use the bathroom, and go through and move on, right? And so there's no real merit. And unless you're someone who is interested in philosophy, you want to go philosophize somewhere, that's fine. Like, we can have that conversation as pure theory. But in terms of amal, in terms of practicality, in terms of living, let's certainly downplay the dunya and upplay the akhirah, because that's really the reality. We're going to live here for a few years, 60, 70, 20, 30 years, whatever, and it's all said and done. And so I don't need to get into the depth of someone who's born over here and someone who's born over there and stuff. What we need to know is what Allah has said. What Allah is, He's Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arsh istawa, right? It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His Rahmani Rahimi reality that facilitates and creates and asserts. And so everything that's happening is through His mercy and His grace. Okay? And on the day of judgment, Al-Mulku yawma idhin al-haqqu lir-Rahman. On that day, so sovereignty belongs to whom? The most merciful. So it's the most merciful who's managing every affair. Okay, and He tells us to live in this dunya, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. So what we know is Allah's Rahim and Allah's Latif, right? Allah's subtle in His grace. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Wadud, He loves unconditionally. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Jabbar, the one who mends through His power and His might. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has so many beautiful things. He has jalali qualities, He has majestic and powerful qualities, and He has jamali, things that are beautiful and subtle and graceful on the heart, right? So we embrace the fullness of who Allah is and the magnificence of who Allah is and the ultimate wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, as Yasir Fahmi, what am I doing? I'm just doing my very, very, very simple, humble part. I pray my 5 prayers, pay my zakah, fast my Ramadan, try to do some extra ibadat, few extra raka'at here, some reading of the Quran there, some adhkar here and there, when I can. Good to my parents, good to my family members. Try to be responsible and dutiful, take on, and try to serve and help and give khidmah to others. My father says all the time, just plant as many good seeds as you can, and just plant, and inshallah, whatever comes into fruition comes into fruition. It's a beautiful way to think about life. Just always be planting good things.
And I think may Allah Ta'ala preserve your father's life. I think we've all witnessed him do that, mashallah, for decades. May Allah Ta'ala accept from him,
do as much good as you can, alhamdulillah, we just do good and don't overthink of it. Don't overthink it. We in the postmodern world, we have been taught to over theorize and overthink and overcomplicate and kind of, we need to go to a simpler orientation around life, because life is simple. We've complicated it. It's not complicated. And like Sheikh Osama said, لا يسأل عما يفعل. Allah does what He wills. You think, we believe that we're at the center of existence, like me, human, and the human being came into the existence by the will of Allah and will exit from existence. We're not the center of the world. We're like, have you ever seen these diagrams where they show you like Earth, and then they zoom out and they show you the galaxies around Earth, and then the endless galaxies beyond that? We don't even register, right? واحنا مكبرين الموضوع as if احنا قد الدنيا. Like we're like exaggerating the reality as if like we're some big deal. We're a small little gnat, and so just let's be gnats. Like, let's just embrace our size. I don't need to be some superhero, because I'm not. I'm a simple human being. And if I simplify my life, you talk about that boy who was born in a slum somewhere, and his circumstances no access to education, no access to health and proper health care, support, aid, guidance, whatever the case is. Allahu Rahmanur Rahim. Allah yatawalla hadha al-insan. That person for me is not to, like, what that person should mean to me, practically speaking, is not like, oh, why would Allah create a being like that? No. That's not my, that's way above my pay grade. Why would Allah create me where I am and create that person where they are? All I have to do is, if I know that person exists, Ya Allah, what do you expect of me with regards to that person? So Allah says, donate to that person, educate that person, serve that person, help that person, make dua for that person. Then you know what I do? I do the practical things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told me to do towards that person. Not sit back and start theorizing about why, and start, over philosophizing that question. And I'm just doing nothing in the meanwhile, right? I'm just like, in this like weird, contentious debate. Like it's a contentious debate, ma nafsi, like with myself, about, we all need to learn so much more about what Allah says about himself and come into terms with that and surrender to that truth, because that's where all of equilibrium, balance, and beauty lies. Allahu Akbar.
So quote number 1 of the day, be a man and don't be sub that. Quote number 2, well, let's just all be gnats.
Yeah, there you go. Listen, the words just flow. I don't know what to do. They just come
Takeaways
forth.
from today's session, huh?
Yeah. Don't be sub that, and let's all be gnats.
Don't be sub man. Be a gnat.
Bismillah. I have 2 more questions that we're going to get to, inshallah. The last one I just think is a good one for us to end on. I think it'll be a nice spiritual send-off, inshallah. The one before that I'm going to address, and if either of you mashayikh want to comment on it, by all means do so. I'm just doing so to speed it up. And because knowing the 2 mashayikh, I'm not sure how engaged they've been in this world. So one of the questions we got revolved around our thoughts on a particular YouTube personality who is very famous for his anti-Islam videos, and specifically his videos against our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm not mentioning his name for various reasons, because he's only one of many, and sometimes by mentioning the name, you transform the subject into something that you don't mean for it to be. In general, it's been quite a while since I've watched these videos. They've become, for years and years, they've become very unwatchable for me. They're beyond the fact that they're mind-numbing at times. In terms of their intellectual level, they're also quite often, especially from the individual that was asked about, they're quite often very overtly and explicitly on purpose disrespectful of our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they're not just debating his truthfulness or presenting doubts or issues that they have. They're going out of their way to be insulting and demeaning of our beloved Messenger, and that's something that to any believer is very hurtful. And there's no reason for us to put ourselves in a scenario where we keep exposing ourselves to that nonsense. But I did want to mention for those, because I get questions about that personality and many other personalities like him quite a bit. I'm going to beg everyone who watches them, please, Sheikh Osama mentioned this earlier in the talk, but do not learn your religion from people who hate Islam. So if you're going to spend time watching videos about Islam, watch videos from, we have plenty of very solid mashayikh and dua who are on YouTube all the time. And they have the full seerah online, they have the shama'il of the Prophet online, they have discussions of the Quran online, and they're extremely well done. They're very engaging. You don't have to expose yourself to these people. If you really want to learn Islam holistically from people who have genuinely studied it and care about it and love it and are going to give you the full picture. Because quite often what happens from these online anti-Islamic personalities, they will take snippets of the Prophet's statements or life, many times mistranslate or take the worst possible translation that they found from some 7th century translation somewhere. 7th century doesn't make any sense, but you guys know what I mean, like 18th century translation somewhere. They'll take it and they'll run with it. They have no clue what was actually said, what the context of the hadith was, what the context of the scenario was, and they don't discuss the whole breadth and history of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. They'll take one snippet, they'll mistranslate it, then they'll read in the worst possible scenarios or intentions you can possibly read in, that anyone who knows the Prophet would easily know this is definitely not what the Prophet meant. And then they'll make some mocking issue of it. So these people, when they do that, are not to be taken seriously. And so quite often, the reasons why you don't find so many Muslims commenting on them is because if you just learn the very basics of the Prophet's life and his character and his description, the arguments that they make fall apart because you'll start to notice how facetious and untrue they are from the very beginning. They take a morsel of truth and then they completely mangle it and misinterpret it to try and make an argument and try to mock the Prophet ﷺ. So if you're going to study from people who know Islam and study it holistically. And then if you want to later on go back and build responses to these people because you think it's going to help some others, by all means do it. But by and large, from my exposure to these people, they are not to be taken very seriously. There are some Christians and atheist thinkers who are very sincere and honest and intellectual in the way they debate Islam. That's perfectly fine to engage in. But even then, don't take your Islam from them. Go learn Islam from people that really love Islam, and then later on you can come back and expose yourself to some of these thoughts. That was the question. I gave my 2 cents. I don't know if Sheikh Yasser or Sheikh Hussein want to add anything.
If I can just say, Jazakallah kullu khair, I think you covered much of what's needed, but I just want to add something. I mean, some may say, okay, what Ustaz Zaid is saying is like an emotional appeal. Go to people who love Islam, then come to this stuff. And that's so some people may critique that, although he's 100% right. But I would say, as an addition to that, no, it's actually a part of academic integrity that you go to scholars and scholarship. Islam is not some like toy that we're playing with. Islam is a long and rich history with a profound intellectual legacy, and there's a lot of academic rigor that spans 1400 years. And these clowns that are on YouTube, and they are pure raunchy religious entertainment. They have nothing to offer. It's like everyone's in the business of entertainment today. So it's raunchy religious entertainment. Okay. Oh, Prophet Muhammad. Yeah. Okay, whatever. And some of these hadiths, right? And it's like, it's all garbage. Wallahi al-azim, I don't even listen to 30 seconds because it's like, if we start to listen to these people as if they're saying anything of benefit, we're discrediting we're discrediting the entire intellectual enterprise, right? Really, Abu Hanifa, he said, it's time now that Abu Hanifa puts his feet out, because what are you talking about? Like, you're not even saying anything that's even remotely productive. Now, some of you may say, well, Sheikh, that's kind of dismissive. He's bringing up a shubha. Shouldn't you respond? No. Why should I respond to someone who just decides he's going to start blabbering, running his mouth on YouTube? Brothers and sisters, do not empower nonsense. We should not be encouraging foolhardiness. Islam, and by the way, not just Islam. If you let me say, if any of those of you who are listening, if some hack job of a person decides to open up a YouTube page and start talking about medical procedures and surgery and the history of like cancer treatment, and has no identifiable, even remote credentials to be talking about this, but is able to do that same type of garbage, picking and choosing and making things sound like there's something and creating a story and a narrative that's attractive and it's spicy and then it's like, oh my God, like, what's this guy saying? You hear what this guy saying is about like the history of cancer treatment? Everyone will be like, what are you talking about? I mean, there's medical journals, there's respectable periodicals, there's history, there's universities, there's research centers, there's endless amount of academic analysis and study that's been done in this whole enterprise. There's doctors, there's professionals. Why are you listening to some guy on YouTube? So it's not just an emotion. This is my point, is it's not just an emotional appeal. No, it's if I want to be an academician, I want to be someone who actually has some integrity in how I think, I have to go to the people of knowledge, the people who actually have, who've gone through the rigor. And it's an extremely rigorous process. And you never even, like, you can go to the heights of the height. Like Imam Shafi'i said, the more I increase in knowledge, the more I realize how ignorant I am. You want to reduce the entire hadith enterprise, like this whole latest conversation around the Quranic script and the different variants readings means, like, what are you, it's such a, go to like any student who studied anything about the qira'at, like a student, not even a sheikh, and they're like, huh? What do you just be quiet, just go back and, eat a burger. Like, just is my, so wallahi, I'm being 100% serious. Like, I'm dismissing this, and people will say, like, you want to identify me as arrogant, go ahead, but I'm dismissing it because it's dismissible, because it's nonsense. It's like we're having big boy talk, and then some ahbab comes and starts like talking about, like, did you see how that car just passed? Like, what are you talking about? We're talking about this problem here. You're talking about a car just passed. Go play with the car, right? And get away from us. And that's
got our rant. Huh? We got our rant for the day.
No, but like, because the problem is the real problem is here, right? Is that unfortunately so many young people, because of the YouTube culture, and because of the social media culture, we just default to what we're exposed to. Some idiot on YouTube opens up a page and starts to ramble his mouth, right? We give him the time of day. No, I fault you, brother or sister who's listening to this person. Wallahi, I do. I fault you, not because you're a bad person, but because as a loving brother in Islam, don't give these individuals who have zero credentials the time of day. I don't care if they're like, YouTube views have 1 million, 2 million, 3. Oh my God, this guy has like 500 million views on his video. Let me see what he's saying. No, 500. Those numbers are empty. They're fluff. Okay. Bifadlillahi ta'ala, in this world, there is something called scholarship. Scholarship as an enterprise, as an endeavor that spans disciplines: mathematics, science, philosophy, history, politics, religion. It's a discipline, and it's rigorous, and it's a process. We have to start to respect our minds. We have to respect scholarship. We have to respect the fact that there is a pathway to deciphering and asking questions and elucidating realities. Right? Don't build your academic prowess on, entering into some empty debate with like idiots online. That's just like, that's foolhardy. It's childish to do that. Right? And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may Allahumma wa qur rabbi zidni ilma. Allah increase us in knowledge. Wa na'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa. Wallahi, these people, ilmun la yanfa. I would say with
they're not. It's not even.
Let me hold on, please. Hold on. It is ilmun la yanfa. These people, they're not saying anything of productive knowledge, and it's a waste of time to listen to them. Right? I'm telling you, it's a waste of time, and it's borderline sinful to waste your time to listen to these people who are not offering you anything other than the rambling shubuhat. If they were the philosophers of the old, like the ulama of kalam, engaging in like real rich philosophical debate with a khasm or a nid, someone who's an equal, and they're talking about things with principles, with like agreed upon principles, I would agree to that. Like I would understand that. Potentially I can theorize it, but these people, they're not even offering anything that is of productive, and we surrender our minds to them because they have a loud, bombastic microphone. We just turn it off. Wallahi, that's the solution. Turn it off. And وَإِحْرِصْ عَلَى مَا يَنْفَعُكَ. And be keen on that which is a benefit to you. And this is not an emotional appeal, even though I'm emotional. This is an objective appeal. This is an appeal of integrity. Okay? Is that clear? Is that point clear? This is an appeal of integrity.
I also want to say, just to back that point up, so that no one misunderstands. Right? Honestly speaking, right? Because I've been asked about some of these people over and over again. When I open up their videos, I promise you, wallahi, within 3 minutes of listening to them, every statement the person made about Islam is wrong. Every single statement. And I'm not a scholar. I'm not someone who knows quite a bit. Just a basic person who studied their religion will listen to them and be like, this person really, I don't even know where to begin in breaking down the foolishness in their point. So Sheikh Yasser and I, we're not making an emotional appeal as emotional as Sheikh Yasser was. Sheikh Zam is trying to jump in though.
No, I'm not. I'm actually
Okay.
enjoying this. Please go on.
I will say this for someone who wants to bring up a question about these people in the future. I would advise you if
Bring
you're
them to
serious
me. Send them to me.
No.
Anyone who wants to ask about these people, you give them my number.
No. I want to say something seriously though, because
Yeah,
we
go ahead.
definitely welcome all questions here.
No, of
We
course,
always
wallah.
have. We always have. I think it's a lot more productive if you bring up a specific point that the person made that is maybe confusing you, or is causing you some confusion or doubt, because then we can respond to that issue. But if you're going to ask us about the people in general, this is the best we can do, because it's the truth. It really is the truth. So if in the future you have been exposed to some of these thoughts and for some reason it is causing you to have a doubt, by all means, please bring it to us, but ask about the specific doubt. Like, even if you say, I was watching such and such a person and he brought up this issue, how do we understand this point? It's a lot more productive, I think, for us to answer those like doubts and points of confusion than it is to address, these people who don't seem to have a lot to offer. They really don't have a lot to offer at this point in their lives. Any other comments on this point from either of our two?
I have a lot to say, to be honest, but I think we need an own session of this, because there is really, there's a group of people out there in social media who like to present themselves as having the epitome of a rational approach. Okay. And they're very rational in how they're processing matters of religion. There's a very famous podcaster who prides himself on being rational, right? And very logical and very scientific. And on multiple occasions, he's actually discussed Islam, and he's brought people to discuss Islam. And not once has he brought in a Muslim scholar. Not once.
Not once. I agree.
And actually, there are people who've messaged him and sent a message, say, hey, listen, you should bring on Islamic scholars. People, I'm talking about Muslim scholars who are entrenched. Forget about even academics who are, there are non-Muslim academics who are seeped in the Islamic tradition that I would say, take him. If you don't want to take a Muslim because you think a Muslim is going to be biased, then take him. At least take someone who actually has credentials to talk about this stuff, not some pundit, right? Not some propagandist, right? And then who presents himself as rational. They bring up the same idiotic talking points. And my problem, and I guess my frustration and my passion and my emotion is coming from, I don't want young Muslims for a second to assume that listening or processing this information is productive or meaningful. I want, one of the most beautiful aspects of our religion is that it teaches us foundations, methodologies, approach, usul. This is, Sheikh Osama can attest to this. When you go into the Islamic sciences, you just realize it's such a robust process, right? There's a logic, there's a logical progression, there's an approach. You study this, you analyze this. The amazing thing, most of these fools, they bring the doubtful, holes in Islam from the books of Muslim scholars that preserved these things, right? The scholars that actually preserved and addressed and negotiated, and they think they've done, because what are they playing on? They're playing on the ignorance of the masses, right? They know full well that most people, Muslims and non-Muslims, are ignorant. So they can just put anything out there and Muslim, oh my God, really? Right? And it's like, well, there's nothing to be frazzled here. So turn that off, mute it, silence it, delete it, right? Study this religion through scholars of this religion, people who actually are steeped in the traditional educational academic disposition around Islam. But inshallah, hopefully we'll have a session dedicated to this at some point.
Barakallah fiqh, Shaykhi.
So forgive me, and I hope the questioner does not think I'm attacking them. Wallahi, I'm not attacking the questioner. I'm attacking, just the.
Allah barak fiqh. And that's why I made the comment that I made. If you have questions, please continue to bring them to us.
Feel free, wallahi.
I would just advise that, if you want to bring up a specific doubt, please bring that up directly. It'll help us answer the question a little bit more directly, inshallah. The last question now, because we're pushing 2 hours, but I think it's a good question. It's been asked again multiple times. It's been asked in previous sessions. And I think it's a good spiritual note to end the night on, inshallah. Should we fear death as Muslims? Go ahead, Sheikh. Sheikh Yasser Sheikh Osama, go ahead. Sheikh Yasser just expended all of his energy. on the YouTube losers. So
Yeah, and I think this is a great question. I think I would ask the question a little differently. I wouldn't say should we fear death, but the question is you know is it okay to have stress and anxiety when thinking about death? Because for some people it does cause some element of stress and anxiety, and I think the answer to that question is, absolutely. There's so much change that happens when someone transitions from the reality of the dunya to the reality of the akhirah. And having that stress and anxiety, and I see the look of curiosity on Ustad Zaid's face, similar to when we addressed it before. But I think that, for the mu'min, there's a great deal to hope for in that transition, but it still does not take away from the reality that it is the most major transition in a person's existence. In this dunya, we've become familiar with relationships, family, work, education, routine, eating, drinking, sleeping, exercising, doing fun things, and all the rest. When someone transitions to the akhirah, they're completely leaving all of that behind. The verse says, وَتَرَكْتُم مَا خَوَّلْنَاكُمْ وَرَاءَ ظُهُورِكُم. Such a very eloquent Quranic expression. You've left all that we've given you charge of behind your backs. That is a difficult thing to come to terms with. And for that reason, there are so many points throughout that transition where Allah gives the believer reassurance, because reassurance is absolutely needed. The verse says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا تَتَنَزَّلُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ. At the time of death, the angels come down saying, لَا تَخَافُوا لَا تَحْزَنُوا. Don't be afraid. Don't be sad. And then on the day of judgment, another verse says, وَتَتَلَقَّاهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ هَذَا يَوْمُكُمُ الَّذِي كُنْتُمْ تُوعَدُونَ. The angels meet them. This is the day you were promised. And even in the people in Jannah, Allah tells us in this dunya about their react. There's something nafsi at play there. Allah is telling us about conversations of the hereafter before they actually happen. Conversations among the people of Jannah. They will say to each other, Alhamdulillah, alladhi adhaba anna al-hazan. Alhamdulillah, the one who has removed heartache and pain from our existence. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that while we're still alive in this dunya, that gives a great deal of reassurance and confidence in our approach towards death. So, the question I would say is not, is more of, is it okay to have some stress and anxiety when thinking about the reality of death? Versus should I fear death? I should fear the consequences of being ill-prepared at the moment of death. But death as a concept, it's human and normal to have a sense of anxiety and concern, but the believer quells that with the hope of reward, the hope in meeting Allah, the hope in being in Jannah, and so on and so forth. Wallah, that's how I would answer it.
There's a hadith that captures exactly what Sheikh Usama just said, where the Prophet ﷺ entered upon someone who was dying, and he asked him, how are you? How is your state? He said, I am hopeful in the mercy of Allah, and I'm fearful for the consequences of my sins. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, "Majtama'a fi qalbi mu'min," that these two things, hope and fear, have, when gathered in the heart of the believer, especially in that moment, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fulfill their hopes and protect them from their fears. Okay, so this leads me to yesterday on my channel Prophetic Living. I was talking about husn al-dhanna billah, because it was the hikmah of Ibn Ata'illah where he was talking about having a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And from the places where you're supposed to have the best opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is at the moment of death. That none of us should die except with having the best opinion of Allah, meaning in His mercy and His grace and His forgiveness, etc. And there's a reason why the Prophet ﷺ tells us to remember death often. I think it's very important for Muslims to become far more familiar with death. Meaning not people are scared to talk about death because they are terrified of the idea of death, like leaving this world and leaving what we have and the loneliness and all this kind of stuff, that some of it's real, some of it's not, a lot of it's just like makeup of the mind. But no, we should bring death into a far more familiar place in my life. أكثروا من ذكر هذه من اللذات. Like, remember often that which destroys pleasures, because death is reality. إنك ميت, you are dead. وإنهم لميتون, and they are dead. So if I familiarize myself and I remove this veneer of ambiguity, then I'm like, oh, okay, that's what death is. And I bring it close and I familiarize and I remove the what I would call the type of fear that's hysterical. I don't want to have a hysterical fear of death. I want to have a productive, thoughtful hope and fear in that moment. Okay. And I want something that makes me not, to invest more in that moment, to invest more in the moment of my grave, invest more in the afterlife, right? To think thoughtfully about it. Like Sayyidina Bilal, at his moment of death, when his wife was saying, wa musibata, wa musibata. And he said, no, say wa farhata, warfa harta. She was saying, woe to me, what a calamity. He was saying, no, say, oh, the happiness, oh, the joy. And he said, غَدًا نَلْقَى الْأَحِبَّةِ. Tomorrow I'm going to be with my beloveds, Muhammadan wa sahbah, Muhammad and his companions. That's a very positive orientation and thought process. That Muhammad, Sayyidina Muhammad, but why was his heart there? Because he was very familiar with the Prophet ﷺ, very familiar with Allah, close to death, knows the reality of life, right? And so when you diffuse this hysteria around death and you bring it into a measurable place, wait, death is my reality, and death is certainly inevitable, and death is close, death is near, and I need to just right now, like, just do my part as best as I can. Like, be productive, be thoughtful, have a lot of hope and good opinion of Allah, invoke Allah's name, make dua, call upon Allah. Ya Allah, I love you. Ya Allah, I care about you. I care about your Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. I celebrate your Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. I love Islam. I love the Quran. And I'm trying. I know I mess up a lot, Ya Allah, but I'm trying. I'm doing my part. I'm trying my best. Please help me. Please support me. Please aid me. And you're having this conversation and you're doing your best, and you're stumbling, but you're trying, and you're gaining momentum, and you're getting closer to where you ultimately want to be, inshallah ta'ala. And bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, for the believer, death is the end of pain, bi'idhnillah. It's the end of like real hardship and difficulty. And bi'idhnillah, we ask that, and I always make this dua when someone passes, Ya Allah, make that the moment of their death was the end of their pain and their suffering, and that everything beyond that point in their grave and they are in felicity and happiness. وَنُحْسِنُ الظَّنَّ بِاللَّهِ, we have a good opinion of Allah. As Shaykh Usama said, not falsely. I can't just sit here and do nothing and play whatever I want, eat whatever I want, drink whatever I want, and indulge in anything I want, and then just assume everything's going to be honky-dory. No, I have to put in the requisite effort, inshallah ta'ala. But as the Prophet said, remember death oftenly, right? Often. There are salihin of the past. And some of you may hear this and think it's morbid, but no, think about it for a second. They would dig graves in their backyards and they would sleep in them every night. They would go and lay down and sit down in them. Why? To familiarize yourself, familiarize their body, their psychology. This is where I'm going. And it recalibrates, brings them back to their senses. I'm not saying that we should be like, these weird and wear like, black colors and goth and get into like, be obsessed with death and like, celebrate. No. But it's familiarizing yourself with reality, because when you familiarize yourself with the truth and reality, you become far more balanced and harmonious and settled. You're not as easily frazzled, right, by the shift and the change of circumstances. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to grant us more and more wisdom and understanding of this world and of His will and decree, Ya Rabbil Alameen.
Inshallah, barakallah fikum shuyukhi. To all those whose questions we could not get to today, I apologize. I tried my best to fit in as many as I could, but a bunch of them came in a little late. And 2 hours is pushing it for our audience and for our shuyukh. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, accept from everyone. May Allah subhanahu inshallah accept us all as 2 hours of ibadah and remembrance of Him, inshallah, and gaining knowledge of Him and His religion. May He use it to elevate us all, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Inshallah, we'll continue with the meeting point next week. We hope to see you then. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.